Morning, folks. Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. We are covering the introduction to the Torah by one of the greatest minds of Jewish history. What we're about to experience is quite a fascinating experience. You know, the Torah, we've learned that Torah is so much more than a mere exploration of wisdom like any other wisdom. There was a fellow in our community when he turned 90. When he turned 90, the guy was a neurologist, a very smart man. He loved wisdom. And he would go to all these wisdom seminars. He'd learn about all sorts of ideas. When he turned 90, he said, Rabbi, that's it. The rest of my days I'm dedicating to golf because what do I need the wisdom for? What am I going to do with it? And I said to him, that the purpose of Torah, that this point might be valid for other schools of thought, but the purpose of Torah is not functional, but foundational. It doesn't help us just live in the world. It holds the world together. This is part of my book. I gently explained to him that his questions made perfect sense in every other system of wisdom. Most knowledge is utilitarian. You study in order to build, to perform, or to produce. But Torah is not studied to be used, it is studied to be channeled. The purpose of Torah learning is not functionality, but intimacy, not productivity, but presence. Torah is the pipeline through which Hashem's wisdom descends into this world. When a Jew studies Torah, it is not information being acquired, it is divinity being invited. Golf may fill the afternoon, but Torah fills the atmosphere. One passes the time, the other pulls heaven into earth. One perfects the swing, the other sanctifies the space. And that is why Torah is never wasted, never outdated, and never irrelevant. Even when the hands grow weak and the schedule grows lighter, Torah learning grows more powerful, not less, because the older we get, the less we are asked to do, and the more we are needed simply to draw God into this world. In the final chapters of life, Torah is no longer about application, it's about attraction, not about what we accomplish with Torah, but what the Torah accomplishes through us.
It's a hole-in-one.
A hole-in-one. So this is my answer to him.
You could have just told him what I always say. The Scots invented golf in order to aggravate Jews to death.
The Scots.
That's what it is. If God didn't want man to golf, he wouldn't have created grass and sand.
Water. So what I want to tell you is that the study of Torah is the most meaningful thing that we can possibly do as human beings. It is intimacy with the divine in a manner unlike any other union with the divine. There is no other way to be intimate with God as you can reach through Torah, and that is clearly, explicitly written in Tanya chapter 5. There is no other way to be intimate with God, to experience that oneness, that intimacy, that connection with Torah, with God, except the Torah wisdom. Why? And Tanya explains, because
What about
prayer. What's prayer? Prayer is you talking to God. Very nice. You talking to God. It's lovely. But when you learn Torah, then God and his wisdom are one. God and his wisdom are one. And when God's wisdom becomes enveloped in your brain in a way that you cannot differentiate between your brain and the wisdom, God and your brain are one. As opposed to you talking to God, very nice, sharing ideas. But God is now sharing his essence with you. It's like infusing his DNA into you. That is what Torah is. And now, in order for us to be able, it can be a little overwhelming studying Torah. When you look at Torah, it's like, where do I even begin? It's overwhelming. So that's why you need someone like Maimonides, what we're doing today. Maimonides is coming and he's gets on board and he said, look, folks, let me introduce you to the Torah and let me tell you how to do Torah. What we learned yesterday, and you can find it on youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, is that we learned about the trajectory of oral Torah tradition from mouth to mouth over the 40 generations from Moses to Rav Ashi. Moses is the guy who got the Torah from God. Rav Ashi, 40 generations later, is the one who wrote down the Talmud. The Talmud is the oral Torah. Remember those two main characters in the evolution of the oral Torah. There was Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who in the days of the Romans made the decision to write down the oral Torah in the first place. It's called the Mishneh. The Mishneh, the black and the gray. Then came Rav Ashi, who made the executive decision to write down the Talmud, which is the rabbinic discussion relating, expanding, expounding, understanding, deepening, sharpening the understanding of the terse language of the Mishnah. This is the Talmud. And I want to challenge you guys. Take on a tractate of Talmud. Take on a tractate. Make it yours in 1 year. Toby does it. You could do this. Take on a tractate. Make a chavrusa. Make a chavrusa with someone else in the congregation. Minchas here at 5 o'clock. So at 4:30, every day, whenever you can, make a chavrusa, 2 people. And so we get together, we study Talmud right here, 4:30 to 5 every day, and see what happens. You work your way through it. It's not so hard. It's doable. So Rav Ashi was the one who made that executive decision in the 5th century to write down the oral Torah. And that was what we learned yesterday, is the evolution of the oral Torah given to Moses on Mount Sinai. God spoke it to Moses. Moses spoke it to Joshua. Joshua spoke it to, I think it was Eli. It's in here. It's in the here. Joshua spoke it to Pinchas. Pinchas spoke it to Eli. Eli said it to Samuel. Samuel said it to David. David said it to Achia. Achia said it to Elijah. Elijah said it to Elisha, and so on and so forth. Here on page 127 in the Chayenu. Now, what happens then is, the question is, what happens after Rav Ashi wrote down the Talmud? That was in the 5th century CE. Maimonides was 700 years later in the 12th century CE. And that's where we start today's Rambam. All the sages, I'm going to read through this, okay? All the sages who were mentioned were the leaders of the generations. Amongst them were the heads of the academies, heads of the exile, and members of the great Sanhedrin. What does it mean, heads of the exile? Rashi Galuta, we mentioned them on Shabbos, just after Torah reading, before Musaf. Rashi Galuta is the name of the political leadership of the Jews in Babylon, in Persia. They were called Reish Galuta. So these are the Rebbes of each generation. Each generation has a Moses. Each generation has a Rebbe. The Rebbe is the critical link of the generation between God and the Jewish people. That's why when the Jewish people on Mount Sinai, what made them offer sin with the golden calf? If you read the verse, it's very explicit. They thought that Moses died. And because they thought that Moses died, they were like, how are we going to connect to God? We need a Rebbe, we need a Moses to connect to God. So therefore, they knew that they were going to have a temple. They knew they were going to have a cherubs, a golden ark. So they said, well, we'll make a golden thing. We'll make something out of gold. So they made a golden calf. Now, it was the right thing at the wrong time, because, you know, if your wife tells you to do something and you do it, that's great. But timing is everything. So if you open the car door for her, that's great. That's chivalry. But you open the car door and you knock her down, that's not chivalry. That's bad, right? So you do the right thing at the wrong time. Yeah. So together with them, in each generation, there were thousands and myriads that heard their teachings. Ravina and Rav Ashi were the final generation of the sages of the Talmud. Now, Rav Ashi composed the Babylonian Talmud in Shinar, that's Babylon, approximately 100 years after Rabbi Yochanan. Oh, it's another one. After Rabbi Yochanan composed the Jerusalem Talmud. Now, the Jerusalem Talmud is the green version of this. It's in the library in the other room. There's the Jerusalem Talmud, which is much, much straightforward, more straightforward. It's clear. The Babylonian Talmud is great debates, which is part of the divine design of the spiritual origin of the various souls of the sages. Not for right now, because we're still doing a helicopter overview right now, folks. We're doing a helicopter overview of the whole Torah. The intent of both the Talmuds is to elucidate the words of the Mishnah. Remember, what's the Mishnah? The Mishnah is the oral Torah. Right, somebody says that taking out the garbage is very nice. But if you take out the garbage during dinner, that would be inappropriate. She's trying to have a conversation with you, and you're like, oh, I gotta go. Take out the garbage. I mean, it's very nice to take out the garbage, but at the wrong time. Thank you, KPS. Good. Okay, so the Mishnah is the oral Torah, which is what God explained the written Torah with. The oral Torah was written down in the Mishnah and then written down further in the Talmud. to explain its deeper points, that's what the Talmud does, and to relate the new matters that were developed by each court from the era of Rabbeinu HaKodesh, of Rebbe, until the composition of the Talmud. From the entire body of Talmud, of knowledge stemming from the two Talmuds, the Tosefta, the Sifra, and the Sifri, we spoke about them yesterday. These were additional commentaries on the Mishnah, can be derived the forbidden and the prohibited. Sorry, the forbidden and the permitted, the impure and the pure, the liable and those who are free of liability, the invalid and the valid, who as was received in tradition, one person from another, in a chain extending back to Moses at Mount Sinai. In other words, if you learn the Mishnah and the Talmud and the two Talmuds and the Tosefta and the Sifri and the Sifra, you'll know everything you need to know. That's it. Nice and easy. Basically, it's, let's say, I don't know, it's a lot of bucks, right? Also, the sources mentioned above, I mean, this is just volume 20 out of 72 volumes here. Also, the sources mentioned above relate those matters which were decreed by the sages and prophets in each generation in order to build the fence around the Torah. So they also added in the additional stringencies that were added with time. We were explicitly taught about this practice by Moses as implied in Leviticus, and you shall observe my precepts, which can be interpreted to mean make safeguards for my precepts. God is saying, don't just, you got to create a safeguard, a guardrail. If you've ever been to Victoria Falls, it's in Zimbabwe. It's like Niagara Falls, just non-commercialized. So when you go to Victoria Falls, it's unbelievable. They call it, the locals, they call it the smoke that thunders in their Zulu language, whatever language is over there. But you go to Victoria Falls, it's amazing. You can walk right over to the edge and peer down, and there is a sheer drop. I don't know how deep that is, but it ain't pretty.
It's like Grand Canyon.
Yeah, but there's no railings, nothing. I've never been to Grand Canyon. I don't know.
There are places where there are no railings.
Same thing with Table Mountain. Table Mountain, when I went there with my kids and my family in Cape Town, I said to my kids, if this was in America, there'd be a lawyer sitting right here giving out business cards. I mean, you could literally walk over to the edge.
But Grand Canyon has that too, which is amazing.
Amazing, right? I imagine that Niagara is much more lawyered, right?
The most spectacular is Iguazu Falls.
Iguazu Falls, Venezuela? No,
It's
Venezuela?
in between Brazil and Argentina.
Brazil and Argentina. Iguazu, fantastic.
Unbelievable.
Amazing, good. So also, so you're supposed to make a guardrail to the Torah. You're not supposed to just have a sheer drop. You're supposed to have a guardrail like 20, 30 feet out. Similarly, it includes the customs and ordinances that were ordained or practiced in each generation according to the judgment of the governing court of that generation. So there were decrees that were added and there were customs that were added, right? It is forbidden to deviate from these decisions, as is implied by Deuteronomy. Do not deviate from the instructions that they will give you left or right. In other words, when the rabbis of your generation give you guidance, you're bound by that guidance. You shall not deviate from the guidance that they give you left or right. Now, this doesn't mean that some guy who decided to go to FedEx Kinko's and print themselves a certificate that says I'm a rabbi can now tell you what to do, right? This is, you didn't realize. So if you see a certificate that certifies Rabbi Jessica McDonald as the certifying rabbinic authority by the Zoological Association of Iguazu Falls, you'll know that this is a little suspect, right? So it all depends. You see a kosher certification, you got to know that it's reliable. I'll give you an example. You walk into a restaurant, guy walks into a restaurant, he says, "Is this place kosher?" So the restaurant points to the wall. He's like, "Look, it's kosher. Look at the picture on the wall. That's my grandfather. White beard, yarmulke, tzitzis." So the guy says, "Listen, if he was behind the counter and you were on the wall, I'd feel much more comfortable."
Very good.
You got to consider the source, folks. You got to know who you're talking to. So in the sages, the true God-fearing Torah sages of your generation are giving you guidance. You have to incorporate that, and that was what was incorporated into each generation of the Talmud. They incorporated not only the oral Torah received from Moses on Mount Sinai, but also the derived oral Torah by divine exegesis, the 13 principles of hermeneutics. It's extraction. It's like extracting certain laws of how to extract. The sciences of interpretation, of interacting Torah. So there's received oral Torah, there's derived oral Torah. Then there is decreed oral Torah by the sages of each generation. And then there are customs. It also includes marvelous judgments and laws, which were not received from Moses, but rather were derived, that's what we just said, derived by the courts of the latter generations based on the principles of biblical exegesis. The elders of those generations made these decisions and concluded that this was the law by consensus. Rav Ashi included in the Talmud this entire body of knowledge, stemming from the era of Moses, our teacher, until his own era. 40 generations incorporated. That's an amazing achievement in the Talmud. What they put together here is unbelievable. In our generation, Art Scroll Masorah translated the Talmud. They made it accessible. It's unreal. There are people that are able to learn the Talmud today. It's in English, folks. If you can read ABC, you can actually do this. You can actually read the Talmud. Just open it up and start. It's amazing. It's actually doable. The sages of the Mishnah also composed other texts to explain the words of Rabbeinu of the Torah. Rabbi Hoshea, the disciple of Rabbeinu Kodesh, composed an explanation of the book of Genesis. Rabbi Yishmael, this is again back to the 2nd century. Rabbi Yishmael composed an explanation beginning at these are the names. That's the book of Exodus until the conclusion of the Torah. This is called the Mechilta. Rabbi Akiva also composed a Mechilta, which is a commentary. Other sages of the following generations composed other collections of the interpretations of verses called Medrashim. All of these works were composed before the Babylonian Talmud. So these are collections, these are notes of the oral traditions that the great sages of history put together. So if you work through all these works, you're going to get the whole Torah. Thus, Ravina, Rav Ashi, and their colleagues in the 5th century represent the final era of the great sages of Israel who transmitted the oral law. They passed decrees, ordained precepts, and put into effect customs. These decrees, ordinances, and customs spread out amongst the entire Jewish people in all the places where they lived. After the court of Rav Ashi composed the Talmud and completed it in the time of his son Mar bar Rav Ashi, the Jewish people became further dispersed throughout all the lands. It was just in time because we were just about to be the Romans. In the 5th century. In the 5th century. Anti-Semitism escalated, Jews had to flee, and now they had a book to take with them. So they didn't have to worry about memorizing everything. They had books.
It wasn't just the flight, sorry. It was also the Vandals and the Teutonic tribes that come in.
Because Rome was conquered in the 5th century, right? So the Vandals, the sacking of Rome, right? Right. So this was the Romans. Think about it. The Romans, as cruel as they were, they were very good for developing infrastructure like roads. They were engineers, aqueducts. The problem was when the Vikings conquered the Romans. Who conquered the Romans?
The Lombards and the Teutonics.
Who the gangs? Whoever came in. Right. When they conquered Rome, they neglected the infrastructure of the Romans, and that's why travel, communication was neglected. Christian Europe fell into the Dark Ages at that time, and that's why the Jews were not able to communicate with each other. So it's a good thing they had the books just in time.
How did they? When was the Gutenberg printing press?
No, that was 14th, 15th century.
My point is, how did they?
Handwritten.
Like one person?
No, they would have like 100 scribes in a room, and the guy was talking. They would all be writing.
No copy machine.
Old-fashioned Xerox machines. Right, reaching the distance, and that's why it was such a crime when books were burned.
1450 Gutenberg.
Yeah, reaching the distant extremes and far removed islands. Strife sprung up throughout the world, and the paths of travel became endangered by troops. Torah studies decreased, and the Jews ceased entering the yeshivas in the thousands and myriads, as was customary previously. Instead, individuals, the remnants whom God called, would gather in each city and country, occupy themselves in Torah study, and devote themselves to understanding the texts of the sages and learning the path of judgment from them. So what would happen was, if you were a rabbi in a specific space, you were relied on by the entire region of Jews to be teaching Torah, because there wasn't really the ability to communicate with other places. Every court that was established after the conclusion of the Talmud, regardless of the country in which it was established, issued decrees, enacted ordinances, and established customs for the people of that country. They had no choice; they needed to. Or those of several countries. These practices, however, were not accepted throughout the Jewish people because of the distance between their different settlements and the disruption of communication between them. I mean, think about it. A Jewish community out in Perpignan, on the border of Spain and France, issues a decree. Why would that have any bearing on the Jews of Fez, Morocco, or of Fustat in Egypt? Since each of these courts were considered to be individuals, and the High Court of 71 judges had been defunct, that's the Sanhedrin, for many years before the composition of the Talmud. People in one country could not be compelled to follow the practices of another country, nor is one court required to sanction decrees which another court had declared in its locale. Similarly, if one of the Geonim interpreted the path of judgment in a certain way, while the court which rose afterward interpreted the proper approach to the matter in a different way, the opinion of the first need not be adhered to absolutely. Rather, whichever position appears to be correct, whether the first or the last, is accepted. So what happens now? These principles apply to the judgments, decrees, ordinances, and customs which were established after the conclusion of the Talmud. However, all the matters mentioned by the Babylonian Talmud are in fact incumbent on the entire Jewish people to follow. So whatever was until Rav Ashi, till the 40th generation from Moses, was incumbent upon all Jews. But once they closed the Talmud, now Judaism became localized, which is where Maimonides is going to fill a huge gap. We must compel each and every city and each country to accept. Just switch over to the next day if you're on the app, right? We're in tomorrow's Rambam. We must compel each and every city and each country to accept all the customs that were put into practice by the sages of the Talmud. Remember, until the Talmud, everybody is obligated to pass decrees paralleling their decrees and to observe their ordinances, since all the matters in the Babylonian Talmud were accepted by the entire Jewish people. The Talmudic sages who established ordinances and decrees, put customs into practice, arrived at legal decisions, and taught the people concerning certain judgments representing the totality of the sages of Israel, or at least the majority of them. All the laws of the Talmud are binding to all Jews. They received the tradition regarding the fundamental aspects of the Torah in its entirety, generation after generation, in a chain beginning with Moses, our teacher, as we discussed, right? So everything in the Talmud is binding to all Jews. All the sages who arose after the conclusion of the Talmud and comprehended its wisdom and whose prowess gained them a reputation are called the Geonim. The Geonim is after the closing of the Talmud. Geonim mean geniuses, right? All these Geonim that arose in Eretz Israel, in Babylonia, in Spain, and in France taught the approach of the Talmud, revealing its hidden secrets and explaining its points, since the Talmud's manner of expression is very deep. Furthermore, it is composed in Aramaic with a mixture of other tongues. This language was understood by the people of Babylonia in the era when the Talmud was composed. However, when they moved to the rest of Europe, to the Mediterranean basin, in other places, and even in Babylonia in the era of the Geonim, a person cannot understand this language unless he has studied it. So we know now we have to study the Talmud in order to get to understand Torah, but now we're no longer speaking Aramaic. You know, there was, what happened was that there was, things happened to us which seemed to be so evil, but really are part of the divine plan. There was the story of the 4 captives in the Ionian Sea. 4 Talmudic sages were traveling in the 10th century. They were traveling from Italy, Bari, Italy, to somewhere in Tunisia, in Africa. And in the Ionian Sea, they were captured by pirates. And the pirates sold them as slaves to 4 different communities, to Cordoba, Spain, to Fostat in Egypt, to Tunisia, and there was a 4th place, which I forget right now. And these guys became the luminaries of Torah life. Remember, Babylon was the center of Jewish life from the 3rd century to the 10th century. But now, when they were taken captive by pirates, the 4 captives became luminaries of their own communities in Spain, in Tunisia, Egypt, and maybe Morocco. It was Fez. I think it was Fez, Morocco, and that's how they became. The Torah was now spread, but it wasn't in Aramaic anymore. So what are you going to do? We got a problem evolving. The inhabitants of each city would ask many questions of each Gaon, of each genius who lived in their age, to explain the difficult matters that existed in the Talmud. Now, that wasn't one of the 4 captives. They would reply to them according to their wisdom. The people who would ask the questions would collect the replies and make texts from them so they could consider them in depth. So in other words, when you would ask one of your local sages in the post-Talmudic era, you would try to write a responsa, an account of the response of the question answered. Also, the Geonim of each generation composed texts to explain the Talmud. Some of them explained only certain sections of Jewish law, halachos. Others explained selected chapters that had created difficulty in their age. Still others explained entire tractates or orders. You may have heard of Geonim like Rabbi Saadia Gaon, Rabbi Hai Gaon. These were different geniuses who wrote very fundamental works. Also, the Geonim composed texts according to the decisions of Torah law regarding what is permitted and what is forbidden, when one is liable and when one is free of liability. So they try to clarify the law with regard to subjects that were necessary at the time so that they would be accessible to the grasp of a person who could not comprehend the depths of the Talmud. What the Geonim, the geniuses, were doing from the 5th century onwards is that they were trying to make the Torah reachable. They were trying to make it understandable. Remember, the Torah is coming from God up in heaven. Moses brings it down to earth. 40 generations pass it over orally. Rabbeinu HaKadosh puts it down to writing. Rabbi Ashi puts it down in the Talmud, the commentary in writing. But now the Geonim, they're like, look, we don't speak this language anymore. We're going to try to simplify it. This is the work of God, which is performed by all the Geonim of Israel from the completion of the Talmud until the present date. 1108 years after the destruction of the temple. The temple was destroyed in 69 CE. 4,937 years after the creation of the world. So Maimonides lived. Let's do. The year was 1177. Thank you for doing the math for us. 1177, and we're in 2026, right? So about 900 years ago. At this time, we have been beset by additional difficulties. Why? Because everyone feels financial pressure. The wisdom of our sages has become lost, and the comprehension of our men of understanding has become hidden. In other words, even our rabbis today are a little dimmer. Now, don't forget, in the days of Maimonides, there was a new curse brought upon the world, which the sages of the Talmud never even heard of before. And that was the curse of radical Islam, which only was invented in the year 587 CE, in the 6th century, right? These Almohads, they believed, Almohads, by the way, is a Hebrew word. Elokim Echad. Elokim Echad, one God. They preached the radical approach to one God. Elokim Echad Almohad. If you don't believe in God, you're going to chop your head off. Our version of God. Right? So as long as Jews would submit to them and acquire dhimmi status, secondary status, they would be allowed to live. Humiliated, but allowed to live. If you didn't accept them, they'd kill you. So Maimonides was born in Cordoba, Spain, ran away from the Almohads to Fez, Morocco, eventually landed up in Cairo, Egypt, where he dies until he's ultimately buried into Tiberias in Israel. But he's living his life like with so much chaos. And the comprehension of our men of understanding has become hidden. Therefore, these explanation laws and replies which the Geonim composed and considered to be fully explained material have become difficult to grasp in our age. For them, they thought that this was clarified. But for us, we've become spiritually diminished. We don't really understand what they were talking about. And only a select few comprehend these matters in the proper way. Needless to say, there is confusion with regards to the Talmud itself, both the Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmud, the Sifri, and Tosefta, for they require a breadth of knowledge, a spirit of understanding, a spirit of wisdom, and much time for appreciating the proper path regarding what is permitted and is forbidden and the other laws of the Torah. Think of it this way. Today, how many meetings do you have in one day? You could have 10, 20 meetings. If you're a busy doctor, you could see 90 patients in a day. In those days, you had like one meeting a week. 2.5 days travel, one way, 2.5 days travel the other way. And we had a drink. That's how they roll, right? So there was more time. If you took your book with you, you were reading 97% of the week. Right? You're walking a little bit, you're meditating, you weren't really distracted with the ceaseless flow of text messages and doom scrolling and other stuff that distracts us. Therefore, I girded my loins, I, Moses, the sign of Maimon of Spain. Maimon was in Maimonides. I relied upon the rock, blessed be he. I contemplated all these texts, and I sought to compose a work which would include all the conclusions derived from these texts regarding the forbidden, the permitted, the impure, and the pure, and the remainder of the Torah's laws in all clear and concise terms, so that the entire oral law could be organized in each person's mouth without questions or objections. Wow.
Amazing.
Wow. In 1177, almost 2,000 years after Moses, he says, let's take the entire oral law and put it into an encyclopedia format. Instead of arguments, this one claiming such and another, this text will allow for clear and correct statements based on the judgments that result from all the texts and explanations mentioned above from the days of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, which was the author, the editor of the Mishneh, the oral Torah, in the 2nd century until the present, 900 years. This will make it possible for all the laws to be revealed to both of those of lesser stature and those of greater stature regarding every single mitzvah, and also all the practices that were ordained by the sages and the prophets. To summarize, the intent of this text of Maimonides is that a person will not need another text at all with regard to any Jewish law. Rather, this text will be a compilation of the entire oral law, including also the ordinances, the customs, and the decrees that were enacted from the time of Moses, our teacher, until the completion of the Talmud, as were explained by the Geonim in the text they composed after the Talmud. The 4 parts of the oral Torah you just referenced: the received oral Torah from Moses, the derived oral Torah by the principles of divine exegesis, the decrees ordained by the sages of each generation, and the customs of each locale. All of that is clearly outlined for us in the book of Mishneh Torah. Therefore, I have called this text Mishneh Torah, which means the second to the Torah, with the intent that a person should first study the written law and then study the second text and comprehend the entire oral law from it without having to study any other text between the two. I saw fit to divide this text into separate halachot pertaining to each particular subject, and within the context of a single subject, to divide these halachot into chapters. Each and every chapter is divided into smaller halachas so that they can be ordered in one's memory. So basically, he takes a book of agriculture, then he divides it into the laws of the tithe, the laws of the corner of the field, the laws of different parts of agriculture, right? Marriage, religious laws, right? He divides them so you have a section for tefillin, a section for mezuzah, a section for how to write a Torah scroll, a section for tzitzis, a section for how to say the Shema, a section for prayer, a section for repentance. Everything is clearly organized in ways that it's never been organized before by any prior author, editor of Torah. Regarding the halachas which pertain to specific subjects, some of the laws contain the laws governing only one mitzvah, this being a mitzvah that has many matters of the tradition associated with it and is a subject in its own right. Other laws contain the laws governing many mitzvahs. So some paragraphs will include many mitzvahs, some sections will include just one mitzvah with a lot of surrounding information. Since they deal with the same subject matter, I've divided this text according to topics, not according to the number of mitzvahs, as will become clear to the reader. So Maimonides really wrote this in a way that should be easily palatable for us. He divided it into concepts as opposed to mitzvahs. He's not going in the order of the mitzvahs, he's going in the order of concepts. What would be relevant to the reader? The number of mitzvahs which are incumbent on us at all times is 613. 248 are positive commandments, an action mitzvah, an allusion to the number of limbs in the human body. 365 are prohibitions. An allusion to their number is the number of days in a solar year. Now that we understand the context of what is Maimonides, what he did, what he achieved, we can now go back and understand what we're trying to achieve. When we're studying Torah, we're not here in order to gain wisdom, to occupy our time with some sort of specialized esoteric elective. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring the divine presence into our minds, hearts, and our environment. That's what we're trying to do. It's an invitation. That's what Torah study is. When we do so, we need to study the totality of Torah. Because remember, God and his wisdom are one. So when we study the totality of Torah, not just one part of Torah, we're drawing the totality of godliness into this world. If you can even say such a thing, the totality of godliness. So when we do that, we've got to be able to study the entire Torah. Now you got two options to study the entire Torah. Either study all day and all night, all these books, or study one book. The Rebbe divided it up even further. The Rebbe said you could do it in one chapter a day. You just subscribe to this, guys. That's all it is. Just subscribe to chayenu.org. I'm going to put it on the screen so you can see it. Chayenu.org. CHAYENU.org. And they will mail it to you for a small fee.
Mention my name.
Yeah.
They'll mail it to you and you can study the chapter then. Folks, I want to tell you, it's $23 a month. I want to tell you this. $23 a month. I mean, seriously, you can barely buy coffee for that price. So now I want you to realize when you study the Maimonides, it's not that you're studying it because you have free time. I want you to study this as a religious passion. Where you say, just like I eat breakfast, I've made a commitment to eat breakfast every day. I make a commitment to study the daily chapter of Maimonides, because when you do that, you're ensuring that you are covering the entire Torah in the cycle of 3 years if you're doing one chapter a day, or the cycle of 1 year if you're doing 3 chapters a day. So I want you to realize that take it on. Don't do it because it's interesting. Don't do it because it's so profound and amazing and exciting and it's changing your life. Don't do it that way. Do it as a listener. Remember, when you pray, you're talking to God. When you're learning Torah, God is talking to you. Just take it in. Take it in and try to understand it. If you want, you can study it with my wife on YouTube. She does it at jewishgardens.com/Chana, CHANA. You can go to Chana's Daily Mitzvah. She summarized the whole thing in 1 year. It's beautiful. You can also do it on the app. Go to Chabad.org/Rambam. There's ways to do it there. Either way, folks, when you do this, remember what we said yesterday. When you study the Rambam every day, you won't have any debts. No financial debts. That's a promise from the Rebbe. That's a big deal. That's a big promise. That's a big promise. But I can tell you, I've seen miracles in this in my own life. Study the Rambam every day. Don't miss a day. Don't miss a day. Every day, you won't have debts. And the Rambam said, if you need a miracle, the Rebbe said, if you need a miracle, all you have to do is to study the daily Rambam, because Rambam is an acronym for Revois Meifsa Be'eretz Mitzrayim, to promote my miracles in the land of Egypt. The Rebbe said the study of Maimonides is directly associated with miracles in your life. You need a miracle? Study the Rambam. Yes, Steve? What's it? You studying Talmud, right? And you have a question.
You have a question about Shabbos.
So what's the
You know
problem?
those books on the Talmud called Shabbos.
Yeah.
You have a specific question. Okay, instead of going through the entire book of
Well, you're not going to find the answer in the Talmud. The Talmud is going to be is an ocean of wisdom. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. You need to go through the latter codifiers that explain it.
But is
So
there a
table of
book-
contents, he's asking.
Is there a book that tells you where in the Talmud to look?
There are books. There are index books on the Talmud. There are. I mean, there's even online. I think it's something called like Web Shas or something. But you can actually buy books today. People have made indexes of the Talmud. Go ahead.
Would it be far-fetched to say I could look that up on like AI and it would break it down?
Not at all. It's not at all. On the contrary, AI is a great tool.
Yeah.
It's like a car. You have to look at AI like a car. You can't say that if I have a car, what do I need a wife for? No, the car makes your marriage much more. The car makes your marriage much more functional. But you can't say, well, I have a car, so I don't need a wife, right? In other words, I have a car, I have AI, so I don't need a rabbi. It doesn't work like that. The AI will give you a much more informed decision. It's kind of like a doctor. If you have AI, do you need a doctor? Yeah, you do need a doctor. You might be coming in more informed, and you might know which questions to ask, as opposed to coming in knowing nothing. You now know something, but you still need a rabbi to guide you, okay? Okay, guys, I'm going to end it over here. I hope you take on the project of Daily Maimonides. Let's make it happen. Let's make miracles happen. All right, guys, have a great day, and see you tomorrow.